The millionaire cried, "Please don't hit me." Then the single dad did the unthinkable. The alley reeked of rotting garbage and broken dreams. But tonight, it also carried the metallic scent of blood and the sharp tang of fear. Victoria Corleone's designer heels scraped against the grimy asphalt as she scrambled backward, her once pristine white suit now torn and stained with dirt that would never wash out, much like the terror now etched in her memory. "Please." The word escaped her lips as a broken whisper, foreign and desperate. Victoria Corleone didn't beg. She commanded boardrooms, crushed competitors, and built empires with the same cold precision her father had taught her. But here, in this forgotten corner of the city she owned half of, she was just another victim. The three men advancing on her moved with the casual confidence of predators who'd done this before. Their leader, a mountain of muscle with dead eyes, cracked his knuckles as he smiled, an expression that held no warmth, only promise of pain. "The mighty Victoria Corleone," he sneered, his voice like gravel grinding against glass. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" Her back hit the brick wall, and there was nowhere left to run. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had built walls around her heart, around her life, around everything that mattered, was now trapped by one. Her trembling fingers found a rough surface behind her, seeking something, anything, to hold on to as her world crumbled. "Please don't hit me." The words tore from her throat like shards of glass, each syllable a piece of her pride dying. She'd never said those words before, not when her father's business partners had threatened her, not when hostile takeovers had nearly destroyed everything she'd built, not even when. The leader's fist drew back, and Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for impact that would shatter more than just bones. But it never came. Instead, a voice cut through the darkness, calm, steady, and completely unexpected. "That's enough. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel, where we dive deep into stories that touch the heart and change perspectives. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Before we continue with Victoria's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this incredible journey unfolds. The three attackers spun around, and Victoria's eyes snapped open to see a figure emerging from the shadows. He wasn't what anyone would expect of a hero. No cape, no muscles bulging beneath expensive clothes. Just a man in grease-stained coveralls, work boots that had seen better decades, and hands that spoke of honest labor rather than boardroom battles. Jake Skywalker looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His dark hair was disheveled from a long shift at the auto shop. Exhaustion lined his face, and there was motor oil under his fingernails. He was the kind of man Victoria would normally look right through, invisible, insignificant beneath her notice. But right now, as he stood between her and certain violence, he looked like salvation itself. "Walk away," the leader growled, sizing up this unexpected interruption. "This doesn't concern you." Jake's eyes never left the three men, but Victoria caught something in his expression, a flicker of recognition when he looked at her, followed immediately by something that looked almost like disappointment. No, that couldn't be right. They'd never met. Had they? Maybe not, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to surprise even him. "But I'm making it my concern." The leader laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You picked the wrong night to play the hero, grease monkey. Do you have any idea who this woman is? What has she done?" Victoria's blood turned to ice. What's she done? What did that mean? Her mind raced through possibilities, through enemies she'd made, through decisions that had seemed so clear in the sterile safety of her corner office, but now felt like they might have consequences she'd never imagined. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I know exactly who she is." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. He knew her. But how? And if he knew who she was, if he knew what she'd apparently done to deserve this, then why was he? "Then you know she deserves everything that's coming to her," the leader continued, his smile widening. "The great Victoria Corleone, destroyer of families, crusher of dreams. Tonight she pays." Victoria's world tilted. Destroyer of families? The phrase echoed in her mind, bouncing off memories she'd buried, decisions she'd justified, people she'd Oh God. The faces began flooding back. Workers she'd laid off, companies she'd dismantled, lives she'd disrupted in her relentless pursuit of profit and power. But which one had led to this? Which decision had signed her death warrant? Jake took a step forward, and Victoria saw his hands clench into fists. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to join them, that her moment of hope had been nothing but cruel delusion. Instead, he did something that defied every expectation, every assumption, every rule of the world Victoria thought she understood. He smiled, not the predatory grin of her attackers, but something warm and genuine and completely, utterly unexpected. "You're right," Jake said softly. "She probably does deserve it." Victoria's heart stopped. "But that's not how this works," he continued, and suddenly his voice carried the authority of a man who'd made peace with hard choices. "See, I've got a little girl at home who believes the world is full of good people doing good things. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let her down by walking away from someone who needs help, no matter who they are or what they've done." The leader's confidence flickered for the first time. "You're making a mistake." "Probably," Jake agreed. "But it's my mistake to make." What happened next would change everything. Not just for Victoria, cowering in the dirt with her empire crumbling around her, but for Jake, the single father who was about to discover that sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. And in that moment, as two worlds collided in the most unlikely of circumstances, neither of them could have imagined the secrets that would be revealed, the hearts that would be broken and healed, or the love that would grow from the ashes of everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and second chances. The first punch was thrown, but it wasn't aimed at Victoria. It was aimed at everything she thought she knew about the world, and the man who was about to turn it upside down. This is part one of our story. How do you think Jake's decision will change both their lives? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part of this incredible journey. The sound of fist meeting flesh echoed through the alley like a gunshot, but it wasn't Victoria who cried out. Jake staggered backward, blood trickling from his split lip, but his eyes never wavered from the three men now circling him like wolves. "Last chance to walk away," the leader warned, shaking out his knuckles. Jake wiped the blood with the back of his hand and glanced at Victoria, who remained frozen against the wall. In that brief moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Not anger or fear, but a bone-deep weariness that spoke of a man who'd already lost everything that mattered and had nothing left to lose except his principles. "Can't do that," Jake said simply. "My daughter Emma would never forgive me." Emma. The name hit Victoria like a revelation. This wasn't about heroics or glory. This was about a father trying to be the man his child believed him to be. The realization cut through her terror, replacing it with something far more dangerous: curiosity about the stranger willing to bleed for her. As the fight erupted around her, Victoria's mind raced backward through the fragments of her life, searching for clues about why she was here, why these men wanted her dead. The memories came in flashes: board meetings where she'd signed papers without reading the fine print, acquisitions that had seemed like smart business moves, families whose names she'd never bothered to learn as she dismantled their livelihoods with surgical precision. Victoria Corleone had built her empire on the foundation her father had laid: cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Emotions are weakness, he'd taught her from the time she could walk. Sentiment is the enemy of success. She'd learned those lessons well, perhaps too well. At 32, she commanded a business empire worth billions, lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city like a throne room, and had never let anyone close enough to hurt her. But she'd also never let anyone close enough to save her. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man currently taking a beating on her behalf was everything she'd been taught to despise. Jake Skywalker, she caught his name when one of the attackers had sneered at him, was blue-collar, struggling, and apparently foolish enough to risk his life for a stranger. He was everything her world had taught her to look down upon. Yet here he was, proving that sometimes the people you judge the most harshly are the ones with the most to teach you about courage. Jake ducked under a wild swing and managed to land a solid hit to one attacker's solar plexus, sending the man gasping to his knees. But the other two pressed their advantage, and Victoria watched in horror as Jake took blow after blow, his coveralls tearing, his face swelling. "Stop!" The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. Please just stop. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, property, anything." The leader paused, breathing hard, and turned to her with that same cold smile. "This isn't about money, princess. This is about justice. About what you took from us." "What did I take?" Victoria's voice cracked. "I don't even know who you are." "Of course you don't," the man spat. "We're nobody to you. Just numbers on a spreadsheet." But Tommy Corleone, he gestured to the man Jake had dropped, who was now struggling to his feet. He used to have a name. He used to have a job at Morrison Manufacturing before you bought it out and gutted it for parts. Morrison Manufacturing. The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. She remembered that acquisition. It had been one of her first major victories after taking over from her father. A struggling factory that she purchased for pennies on the dollar, stripped of its valuable assets, and then closed down. Clean, efficient, profitable. She'd never thought about the workers. And Danny here, the leader, continued, nodding toward the third man. "He lost his house when you foreclosed on half the neighborhood to build that shopping complex. His kids had to change schools. His wife had to take 3 jobs just to keep food on the table." Each revelation was another weight added to Victoria's chest, making it harder to breathe. She'd made those decisions from the safety of her boardroom, surrounded by lawyers and accountants who'd assured her everything was legal. Everything was smart business. She'd never seen the faces, never heard the stories, never considered the human cost of her success. But me? The leader's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouts. "I'm Marcus Voldemort, and you killed my brother." The name meant nothing to Victoria, but the pain in the man's eyes was unmistakable. Raw, fresh grief mixed with rage that had been festering for months, maybe years. "I don't understand," Victoria whispered. "I've never killed anyone." "Haven't you?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "David Voldemort. I am 26 years old. Worked double shifts at Morrison Manufacturing to support his pregnant wife. When you closed the factory, he couldn't find work. Couldn't pay for his wife's medical bills. She lost the baby. He lost hope. Put a gun to his head rather than watch his family starve." The words hit Victoria like bullets, each one finding its mark in her chest. She could see it now, the ripple effects of her decisions spreading outward like cracks in glass, touching lives she'd never considered, destroying futures she'd never imagined. "I didn't know," she breathed, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You didn't want to know," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." Jake chose that moment to surge upward, catching Danny off guard and sending him sprawling. But the effort cost him. He stumbled, clearly running on fumes and determination alone. "Why?" Victoria found herself asking, her voice barely audible. "Why are you helping me? If you know what I've done, why are you?" Jake's eyes met hers across the chaos, and for a moment, the violence seemed to pause. "Because 6 months ago, I was where your brother was," he said quietly, his words somehow carrying despite the noise. "I lost my job when the auto plant closed. Lost my house. I nearly lost my daughter to social services because I couldn't provide for her." Victoria's breath caught. The auto plant. Meridian Automotive. Jake's nod was barely perceptible, but it hit her like a sledgehammer. Meridian Automotive. Another acquisition, another smart business decision, another group of faceless workers whose lives she disrupted without a second thought. "You destroyed my life too," Jake continued, dodging another swing. "But my little girl, she still believes in heroes. Still believes that good people do good things, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Then why help me?" Victoria's voice broke. "Why save the person who ruined your life?" Jake's smile was sad but genuine. "Because Emma asked me what I would do if I saw someone in trouble. And I told her I'd help them, no matter what. I can't be a liar and a hero on the same day." The simple honesty of his words cut through Victoria's defenses like a blade. Here was a man she'd wronged, whose life she'd casually destroyed, and he was bleeding for her because he'd made a promise to his daughter about the kind of man he wanted to be. It was the most humbling moment of her life, but it was also about to become the most dangerous, because Marcus Voldemort had heard every word, and his rage had just found a new target. "So you're one of hers too," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "Perfect. I can settle 2 debts tonight." The knife appeared in his hand like magic, its blade catching the dim streetlight. Victoria's scream died in her throat as she realized that Jake's act of mercy was about to cost him everything. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Corleone discovered what it felt like to care more about someone else's pain than her own. The foundation of who she thought she was began to crumble, but from those ruins, something new was about to be born, if any of them survive the night. What do you think will happen when Victoria realizes she cares more about Jake's safety than her own? Drop your thoughts below and make sure you're subscribed. This story is just getting started. The knife gleamed like a promise of death as Marcus stepped toward Jake, who was swaying on his feet, blood dripping from cuts above both eyes. Victoria watched in horror as the man who'd risked everything for her was about to pay the ultimate price for his kindness. No. The word exploded from Victoria's chest with a force that surprised everyone, including herself. Without thinking, she launched herself forward, her designer heels skittering on the grimy asphalt as she threw herself between Marcus and Jake. The knife stopped inches from her throat. Well, Marcus breathed, his eyes glittering with dark amusement. The Ice Queen has a heart after all. How touching. Victoria's pulse hammered against her neck, so close to the blade she could feel its cold edge. But for the first time all night, her voice was steady. You want me? Take me. But leave him alone. He has a daughter who needs him. Victoria, don't. Jake started, but she cut him off with a sharp look. This is my debt to pay, she said firmly. Not yours. Marcus studied her face, searching for deception, for the calculated manipulation he'd expected from the woman who'd built an empire on other people's suffering. Instead, he found something that made him pause. Genuine fear, not for herself, but for the broken man behind her. Interesting, Marcus murmured. The great Victoria Corleone, willing to die for a stranger. My brother would have found that ironic, considering you let him die without a second thought. You're right, Victoria said, the admission tearing from her throat like broken glass. I did. I made decisions that destroyed lives, and I never looked back to see the damage. I was wrong. I was a monster. The words hung in the air like a confession on Judgment Day. Victoria had never admitted weakness, never acknowledged failure, never allowed herself to be vulnerable. But standing here, with Jake's blood on her hands and Marcus's knife at her throat, she finally understood the weight of her choices. But killing me won't bring your brother back, she continued, her voice growing stronger. And it won't help his wife, or his unborn child, or anyone else I've hurt. Let me make it right. Let me try to fix what I broke. Marcus's laugh was sharp and bitter. Fix it? You think money can fix what you've done? You think writing a check can bring back the dead? No, Victoria said quietly. But it can help the living. Your brother's wife, what's her name? The question caught Marcus off guard. Sarah, he said automatically, then seemed to regret revealing even that much. Sarah, Victoria repeated, tasting the name like a prayer. She's still alive, still struggling, still grieving. Killing me won't help her, but I can. I can make sure she never wants anything again. I can make sure your brother's memory means something. Pretty words, Marcus snarled, but Victoria caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But why should I trust you? Why should I believe you'll keep your word once you're safe? It was Jake who answered, his voice rough but determined. Because I'll make sure she does. Both Victoria and Marcus turned to stare at him. Jake wiped blood from his mouth and straightened, meeting Victoria's shocked gaze with steady determination. I'll hold her accountable, Jake continued. Every promise she makes tonight, I'll make sure she keeps. Every debt she owes, I'll help her pay. Not because I trust her, but because it's the right thing to do. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth she'd never experienced before, spreading through her like sunlight after a lifetime of winter. This man, whom she'd wronged so deeply, was offering to bind his life to hers in service of justice. Not revenge, not profit, but simple, honest justice. Why? She whispered, the question meant for Jake, but somehow encompassing everything. Why was he helping her? Why was he trusting her? Why was he looking at her like she might be worth saving? Jake's smile was sad but real. Because Emma asked me what forgiveness looks like, and I told her it looks like giving people a chance to be better than they were. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric, until Marcus's harsh laugh shattered it. How touching, he sneered. The destroyer and the destroyer, finding love in the ashes. But you're forgetting something. I don't want your money. I don't want your promises. I want your blood. The knife moved faster than thought, but Victoria was already moving too, driven by an instinct she didn't recognize. She grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him sideways, just as the blade whistled through the space where his heart had been. They hit the ground hard, Victoria's body cushioning Jake's fall, her arms wrapped around him protectively. For a moment, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, and Victoria became acutely aware of everything. The warmth of Jake's body against hers, the scent of motor oil and honest sweat, the way his eyes widened as he looked down at her. "You saved me," he said, wondering about coloring his voice. "You saved me first," Victoria replied, and realized she wasn't just talking about tonight. The moment shattered as Marcus roared in fury, raising the knife for another strike. But before he could bring it down, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing closer by the second. "Shit," Danny gasped, struggling to his feet. "Cops, we gotta go." Marcus hesitated, torn between his need for revenge and his instinct for survival. The sirens were getting louder, and Victoria could see the internal war playing out on his face. "This isn't over," he finally snarled, pointing the knife at Victoria. "You think you can buy your way out of this? You think one night of playing hero makes up for a lifetime of destruction? I'll be watching. And the moment you go back to your old ways, the moment you prove this was all an act, I'll finish what I started." He melted back into the shadows with his companions, leaving Victoria and Jake alone in the alley as the first police car rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness like salvation. But as Victoria helped Jake to his feet, both of them battered and bloodied but alive, she realized that the real danger wasn't behind them. It was ahead. Because Marcus was right about one thing. She'd spent her entire life being one kind of person, and changing wasn't going to be as simple as making promises in a dark alley. The question was whether Jake would still believe in her when the real test came, when she had to choose between her old life and the woman she'd glimpsed tonight in his eyes. As the police officers approached, asking questions and taking statements, Victoria found herself stealing glances at Jake. He was everything she'd been taught to dismiss: poor, struggling, idealistic. But he was also brave, principled, and willing to see good in people who didn't deserve it. He was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with the way he made her want to be better. And as they were separated for questioning, Victoria realized with a shock that terrified her more than any knife. She was falling for the man whose life she destroyed. The inciting incident wasn't the attack in the alley. It was the moment Victoria Corleone discovered she had a heart, and that it belonged to the last person in the world who should want it. The real story was just beginning. The plot thickens. What do you think will happen when Victoria tries to change her life? Can Jake really trust her? Or is this all just survival instinct? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood outside Sunny Meadows Elementary School, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel of her Bentley. She'd traded her usual power suits for jeans and a simple sweater, an outfit that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, but looked deliberately understated. The irony wasn't lost on her that even her attempt at humility was expensive. Through the chain-link fence, she could see children streaming out of the building, their laughter and shouts a stark contrast to the sterile silence of her penthouse. She was looking for one child in particular, a 7-year-old girl with dark curls and her father's kind eyes. Emma Skywalker. Victoria had spent the last 3 weeks trying to honor the promises she'd made in that alley. She'd established a foundation for the families affected by her business decisions, starting with a trust fund for Sarah Voldemort that would ensure she never wanted for anything again. She'd personally visited the neighborhoods her developments had displaced, writing checks and funding community centers. But none of it felt like enough. None of it felt real. The police had questioned her and Jake separately that night, and their stories had aligned perfectly. A random mugging, a Good Samaritan intervention, attackers who'd fled when the sirens approached. Marcus and his friends had vanished like smoke, but Victoria knew they were watching, waiting to see if her transformation was genuine or just another calculated performance. She was beginning to wonder the same thing herself. "Daddy." The voice cut through Victoria's brooding like sunshine through storm clouds. She looked up to see Emma Skywalker racing across the playground toward the school's entrance, her backpack bouncing with each step. And there was Jake, waiting for her with a smile that made Victoria's chest tighten. The bruises from their encounter had faded, but she could still see the small scar above his left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the night he'd bled for a stranger. Victoria had been coming here every day for a week, watching from a distance, trying to work up the courage to approach. She told herself she was checking on them, making sure Marcus hadn't made good on his threats. But the truth was more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. She was falling in love with a life she'd never allowed herself to want. "How was school, sunshine?" Jake asked, scooping Emma into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best reader in the whole class," Emma announced proudly. "And Tommy Morrison shared his cookies with me at lunch because I help him with his math." Morrison. Victoria's blood chilled. Tommy Morrison. Could he be related to the factory worker she displaced? The coincidence seemed too cruel to be random. "That was very kind of both of you," Jake said, setting Emma down and taking her hand. "What do you say we stop by the library on the way home? I think they got in that new book about dragons you wanted." "Really?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Can we read it together tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make hot chocolate and read until bedtime." Victoria watched this simple exchange with a hunger that surprised her. She'd never wanted children. They were complications, distractions from building her empire. But seeing Jake with his daughter, witnessing the pure love and joy between them, she felt an ache for something she'd never known she was missing. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Hartwell Industries acquisition needs your approval." Hartwell Industries. Victoria's fingers tightened on the phone as she read the name. Another small company, another opportunity to expand her empire. The old Victoria would have signed the papers without hesitation, absorbed the company's assets, and moved on to the next target. But now she found herself wondering about the employees, about the families who depended on those jobs, about the ripple effects of her decisions. The thought paralyzed her in a way that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Victoria's head snapped up to find Jake standing beside her car, Emma's hand still clasped in his. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes, the genuine worry for a stranger who looked distressed. Victoria's voice caught. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that it was here, all her carefully planned words deserted her. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Jake's eyes narrowed slightly, and she saw the moment recognition dawned. Victoria. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. In the boardroom, her name was spoken with respect, fear, or calculation. But Jake said it like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like she was a person worth understanding rather than a force to be reckoned with. She said lamely, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at how inadequate the greeting sounded. Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, who is this lady?" She looked sad, out of the mouths of babes. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at the child's innocent observation. When was the last time anyone had cared enough to notice her emotional state? "This is—" Jake hesitated, clearly unsure how to explain their connection to his 7-year-old daughter. "This is Victoria. She's a friend." A friend. The word hit Victoria like a revelation. She'd had business associates, employees, rivals, and enemies. But friends? Real friends who cared about her well-being rather than her bank account. She couldn't remember the last time. "Hi, Victoria," Emma said with the fearless friendliness of childhood. "I'm Emma. Are you really sad? Or do you just have a resting sad face? My teacher says some people look sad even when they're happy." Despite everything, Victoria found herself smiling. A real smile, not the practiced expression she wore for cameras and board meetings. "I think I might have a resting sad face," she admitted. "But meeting you is making me feel much happier." Emma beamed at this response. "Daddy says smiling is contagious, like yawning but better. Want to come to the library with us? We're getting a book about dragons, and dragons are the best." "Emma," Jake said gently, "I'm sure Victoria has important things to do." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, surprising herself, "I'd love to see this dragon book." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither adult was ready to address. Jake studied her face, searching for ulterior motives, for the angle she was working. Victoria held his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth she was still learning herself. That she wasn't here as the CEO of Corleone Enterprises, but as a woman who was desperately lonely and drawn to the warmth of his family like a moth to flame. "Okay," Jake said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "But we walk." Emma's trying to get her steps in for her fitness tracker. "I have 10,000 steps already," Emma announced proudly, showing off a colorful watch. "Mrs. Patterson says exercise is good for your brain and your heart." As they walked toward the library, Emma chattering between them about dragons and school and her best friend's new puppy, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced before, the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere, even temporarily. But her phone kept buzzing with increasingly urgent messages about the board meeting, about decisions that needed to be made, about the empire that required her constant attention. The two worlds were pulling her in opposite directions, and Victoria was beginning to realize that she couldn't live in both. "So," Jake said quietly as Emma skipped ahead of them, "what are you really doing here, Victoria?" The question she'd been dreading. Victoria could lie, could give him some story about being in the neighborhood, about coincidence. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "I wanted to see if you were okay. If she was okay. I wanted to." She struggled for words that wouldn't sound pathetic. "I wanted to see what a normal life looked like." Jake stopped walking, forcing her to stop too. "And what do you see?" Victoria looked ahead at Emma, who was now trying to balance on the edge of the sidewalk like it was a tightrope, her arms spread wide for balance. She looked at Jake, whose entire world clearly revolved around making his daughter happy and safe. She thought about her own life, the empty penthouse, the silent dinners, the hollow victories that felt more like defeats with each passing day. "I see everything I never knew I wanted," she whispered. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Jake's expression softened, and for a moment, Victoria thought she saw something that looked like possibility in his eyes. Then her phone rang. "Ms. Corleone?" Her assistant's voice was sharp with panic. "Where are you?" "The board is waiting, and Mr. Hartwell is threatening to pull out of negotiations if we don't move forward today. This deal is worth $50 million. Victoria looked at Jake, who had heard enough to understand. The moment was broken, reality crashing back in like a cold wave. She was Victoria Corleone, CEO and empire builder. He was Jake Skywalker, single father and auto mechanic. They lived in different worlds, and those worlds were about to collide in ways that would test everything she thought she was learning about herself. "I have to go," she said, hating how the words sounded, hating the disappointment that flickered across Jake's face. "Of course you do," he said quietly. "Important business, right?" "Jake, Daddy, where did Victoria go?" Emma's voice called from ahead. "I wanted to show her the dragon statue by the library." Victoria looked at the little girl who had welcomed her so easily, then at the man who was watching her with a mixture of understanding and resignation. She was at a crossroads, and the choice she made in the next few seconds would determine not just her future, but the kind of person she was going to become. The phone was still ringing in her hand. $50 million. Her empire. Everything she'd built. Or a dragon book and hot chocolate, with people who might actually care if she never came home. For the first time in her life, Victoria Corleone hesitated. And in that hesitation, both she and Jake glimpsed the possibility of something neither had dared to hope for. A love that could bridge any gap, if they were brave enough to reach for it. The tension is building. Will Victoria choose her old life or this new possibility? What do you think she should do? Drop your thoughts below and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Victoria stared at the phone in her hand for 3 heartbeats that felt like eternity. Then, with a movement that surprised even her, she declined the call and powered off the device entirely. "The dragon book sounds perfect," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. Jake's eyebrows shot up. "Victoria, that sounded important." "It was," she admitted. "But this is more important." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning that made Jake's breath catch. Emma, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, cheered and grabbed Victoria's hand with the casual trust that only children possess. "Come on. The library closes at 6, and we have to get a good reading spot by the window." As Emma pulled her forward, Victoria felt Jake's eyes on her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. She'd just walked away from a $50 million deal to look at a children's book about dragons. The old Victoria would have called it insanity. The new Victoria, the one emerging like a butterfly from a chrysalis she hadn't even known she was trapped in, called it the first real choice she'd ever made. The library was a revelation. Victoria had forgotten that such places existed. Warm, welcoming spaces where knowledge was free and children could dream without price tags attached. Emma led them to a corner near the children's section, where oversized cushions created a cozy reading nook bathed in golden afternoon light. "This is my favorite spot," Emma announced, settling cross-legged on a purple cushion. "Daddy and I come here every week. Sometimes we read for hours." Victoria lowered herself onto a cushion with the careful grace of someone unaccustomed to sitting on the floor. Her designer jeans, the most casual clothes she owned, felt ridiculously formal in this setting. But as Emma snuggled against her side with the dragon book, Victoria discovered that comfort had nothing to do with thread count and everything to do with connection. "Once upon a time," Emma began, her finger tracing the words as she read, "there was a dragon who lived all alone in a big, cold castle. The story was simple, a lonely dragon who hoarded treasure but had no one to share it with, until a brave knight showed her that the greatest treasure was friendship." But as Emma's sweet voice filled the space between them, Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. She was the dragon. She'd built her castle of money and power, surrounding herself with beautiful, cold things while keeping everyone at a distance. And Jake was the knight who'd shown her what she was missing. "Why is the dragon crying, Daddy?" Emma asked, pointing to an illustration of the dragon weeping golden tears. "Because she's lonely, sweetheart," Jake said softly, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Sometimes when you have everything you thought you wanted, you realize it's not what you needed." Victoria's breath hitched. He understood. Somehow, this man she'd wronged so deeply could see straight through to the heart of her pain. "But she gets happy at the end, right?" Emma asked anxiously. "The knight helps her." "Yes," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The knight saves her." They read 3 more books, Emma's enthusiasm infectious as she shared her favorite stories. Victoria found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. When had she forgotten how to find joy in simple things? As the library began to empty and closing time approached, Emma yawned and curled up against Victoria's side like a sleepy kitten. "I like you," she said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "You smell like flowers, and you laugh like music. Will you come read with us again?" Victoria's heart clenched. "I like that very much." "Good," Emma said decisively. "Daddy needs more friends. He gets lonely sometimes, even though he thinks I don't notice." Jake's face flushed. "Emma, it's true," Emma continued, undaunted. "You make that sad face when you think I'm not looking. The same face Victoria had at school. Maybe you can be sad together and then happy together." Out of the mouths of babes. Victoria met Jake's eyes over Emma's head, and something electric passed between them. Recognition, possibility, and a dangerous kind of hope. "We should get going," Jake said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "Someone has homework to finish." As they gathered their things, Victoria's phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She ignored it, but Jake noticed. "You can check it," he said quietly. "I know you have responsibilities." Victoria pulled out the phone to find 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Her assistant, her board members, her lawyers, all increasingly frantic about the Hartwell deal. The final message, from her assistant, made her blood run cold. "The board voted to proceed without you. Hartwell Industries acquired. 200 employees terminated effective immediately. Mr. Hartwell says to tell you that some things are more important than money, but apparently you disagree." The phone slipped from Victoria's nerveless fingers, clattering to the library floor. Jake caught her arm as she swayed, his touch gentle but grounding. "Victoria, what is it?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. While she'd been playing house, reading fairy tales about dragons and knights, 200 people had lost their jobs. 200 families were about to face the same devastation that Jake had experienced, that Marcus's brother had endured. And it was her fault. Again. "I have to go," she whispered, bending to retrieve her phone with shaking hands. I have to. I need to fix this. Victoria, wait. But she was already moving, her heels clicking against the library floor as she fled toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear Emma's confused voice asking why Victoria was running away, and Jake's gentle explanation that sometimes grown-ups had to handle difficult things. She made it to her car before the tears came, great, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. She thought she was changing, thought she was becoming someone better. But the moment she'd let her guard down, the moment she'd chosen personal happiness over business, people had suffered for it. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she was a destroyer, and all the good intentions in the world couldn't change that fundamental truth about who she was. Her phone rang. Jake's number flashed on the screen. Somehow he'd gotten it from the police report. She almost didn't answer, but something in her couldn't bear the thought of him thinking she'd just abandoned them without explanation. Hello. Her voice was barely a whisper. Victoria, where are you? In my car. Outside the library. Stay there. I'm coming out. Jake, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. A moment later, her passenger door opened, and Jake slid into the seat beside her. Emma was nowhere to be seen, and Victoria's panic spiked. Where's Emma? Mrs. Chun from the library is watching her. She's safe. Jake's voice was calm, steady. Now tell me what happened. Through broken sentences and tears, she couldn't stop. Victoria explained about the Hartwell deal, about the 200 jobs lost while she'd been reading fairy tales. She told him about the board's decision, about her failure to protect the very people she'd sworn to help. I'm exactly what Marcus said I am, she finished, her voice hollow. A destroyer. I destroy everything I touch. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria braced herself for his agreement. For the moment, he'd realized what a mistake he'd made in believing she could change. Instead, he reached over and gently turned her face toward his. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He asked softly. Victoria shook her head, not trusting her voice. I see a woman who walked away from $50 million to read a book with my daughter. I see someone who's been carrying the weight of other people's pain for weeks, trying to make amends for mistakes she didn't even realize she was making. I see someone who cares so much about doing the right thing that she's tearing herself apart when she falls short. But those people will be helped, Jake said firmly, because you're going to help them. Not because you have to, but because it's who you're becoming. The woman I met in that alley 3 weeks ago wouldn't have cared about 200 strangers losing their jobs. But you do care. That's not a weakness, Victoria. That's strength. His words hit her like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. How can you have so much faith in me? After everything I've done to you, to others, how can you believe I'm worth saving? Jake's smile was soft and infinitely tender. Because Emma was right. You do laugh like music. And because when you held my daughter today, you looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And because... He paused, seeming to gather courage. Because I'm falling in love with the woman you're becoming, and I want to help you become her. The confession hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared into Jake's eyes, seeing nothing but honesty and hope and a love she'd never thought she deserved. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, the words feeling like both a confession and a prayer. But I don't know how to be the person you see in me. Then let me help you learn, Jake said, leaning closer. Let me show you what it looks like to choose love over fear, people over profit, connection over control. When his lips met hers, it was like coming home to a place she'd never been but had always been searching for. The kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise and possibility and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for either of them to find happiness. But even as Victoria melted into Jake's embrace, even as she felt her heart opening like a flower toward sunlight, a part of her knew that the real test was still coming. Because Marcus was watching, waiting for her to prove that this transformation was real. And her board, her empire, her entire old life was about to fight back against the woman she was trying to become. The midpoint revelation wasn't just that she loved Jake. It was that love alone wouldn't be enough to save them. She was going to have to choose, once and for all, between the dragon she'd been and the woman she wanted to become. And that choice was going to cost her everything she'd ever thought she wanted. The stakes just got higher. Victoria and Jake have confessed their feelings. But can love really conquer the forces working against them? What do you think Victoria should do about the Hartwell situation? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. sharp, but Victoria had been awake since 3, staring at the ceiling of her penthouse and replaying Jake's kiss over and over in her mind. By the time she walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Corleone Tower, she'd made her decision. She was going to fight for the Hartwell employees. She was going to fight for the woman Jake believed she could become. And if it cost her everything, so be it. Victoria. Richard Lannister, her father's oldest business partner and the most powerful voice on her board, didn't look up from his tablet as she entered. Glad you could finally join us. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Around the mahogany table sat the 12 men who'd helped her build her empire, and who could destroy it just as easily. They'd been her father's allies first, and their loyalty to her had always been conditional on her profitability. Gentlemen, Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table with a composure she didn't feel. I understand there was some confusion yesterday about the Hartwell acquisition. Confusion? Robert Stark, her CFO, laughed harshly. You disappeared during the most important negotiation of the quarter. You ignored 17 calls from your own assistant. That's not confusion, Victoria. That's abandonment of duty. I was handling a personal matter. Personal matters don't pay dividends, Richard interrupted, his pale eyes cold as winter. Your father understood that. He never let sentiment interfere with business. The comparison to her father hit like a physical blow. Victoria had spent her entire life trying to live up to his legacy, to prove she was worthy of the empire he'd built. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that legacy was worth preserving. The Hartwell deal is done, continued Robert. 200 employees terminated, assets liquidated, real estate sold to Meridian Development. Clean, efficient, profitable. Just like your father taught you. Meridian Development. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Who authorized the sale to Meridian? I did, Richard said smoothly. They offered 30% above market value. It was too good to pass up. Victoria's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Meridian Development was owned by Marcus Voldemort's shell company. She'd discovered that connection during her research into the family she'd wronged. He wasn't just watching her. He was actively working to destroy everything she touched, turning her own board against her. You had no authority to make that decision without my approval, Victoria said, her voice deadly quiet. Actually, we did. Richard slid a document across the table. Emergency Powers Clause, Section 12 of the Corporate Charter. When the CEO is deemed unfit to make critical decisions, the board can act in the company's best interests. Victoria scanned the document, her heart sinking with each line. It was all legal, all binding. While she'd been falling in love, her own board had staged a bloodless coup. This is temporary, of course, Richard continued with false sympathy. Just until you remember where your priorities lie. Your father built this company on the principle that business comes first, always. Lately, you seem to have forgotten that lesson. Maybe because that lesson is wrong, Victoria said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. 12 pairs of eyes stared at her like she'd just announced her intention to burn money in the streets. Excuse me. Robert's voice was dangerously soft. Victoria stood, drawing strength from the memory of Jake's faith in her, from Emma's innocent trust, from the woman she'd glimpsed in the library yesterday. I said maybe that lesson is wrong. Maybe there are things more important than profit. Maybe the cost of success isn't worth paying if it destroys innocent lives. Innocent lives? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victoria, these are business decisions. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Your father understood that sentiment is the enemy of success. My father was wrong. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Victoria had never criticized her father, never questioned his methods, never suggested that the foundation of her empire might be built on something rotten. I see, Richard said slowly. And what brought about this sudden crisis of conscience? Could it have anything to do with a certain auto mechanic and his daughter? Victoria's blood chilled. How do you know about Jake Skywalker? Richard's smile was predatory. Victoria, dear, you're worth $3 billion. Did you really think we wouldn't have watched? especially after that unfortunate incident in the alley 3 weeks ago. They knew. They knew everything about the attack, about Marcus, about her growing feelings for Jake. Victoria felt the walls closing in around her, but she forced herself to remain standing. Your little romance is touching, Richard continued, but it's also a liability. Mr. Skywalker and his daughter represent everything this company stands against. Weakness, sentiment, the belief that feelings matter more than facts. They represent everything good about humanity. Victoria shot back. Something you've clearly forgotten. Have I? Richard's eyes glittered with malice. Then perhaps you'd like to know that Mr. Skywalker's employment at Murphy's Auto Shop was terminated this morning. Apparently, his association with you has made him a security risk. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. You can't. Oh, but we can. And we have. His landlord has also been informed that his lease won't be renewed. Amazing how quickly word spreads about unreliable tenants. The room spun around Victoria as the full scope of their manipulation became clear. They weren't just attacking her. They were destroying Jake and Emma to force her compliance. You bastards, she whispered. We're businessmen, Richard corrected. Just like your father. Just like you used to be, before you let a pretty face and a sob story cloud your judgment. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find a photo that made her heart stop. Emma Skywalker walking out of school, unaware of the man in a dark suit following 20 feet behind her. The message was from an unknown number. Cute kid. Be ashamed if something happened to her, because her daddy chose the wrong side. Marcus. He was working with a board, using them to destroy Jake while they used him to control her. It was a perfect trap, and she'd walked right into it. You see, Victoria, Richard said, noting her pale face. This is what happens when you forget who you are. When you let emotions override logic. Your father never would have made such a mistake. What do you want? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Simple. Sign the papers transferring your voting shares to the board for the next 5 years. Continue as CEO in name, but let us make the real decisions. Stop this ridiculous charity work, end your association with Mr. Skywalker, and return to being the ruthless businesswoman your father raised. And if I refuse? Richard's smile was arctic. Then Mr. Skywalker and his daughter will discover just how dangerous it can be to cross the Corleone family. Accidents happen, Victoria, especially to people who can't afford proper security. The threat was clear, and Victoria knew they meant every word. These men had helped her father build an empire through intimidation, manipulation, and worse. They wouldn't hesitate to destroy 2 innocent people to maintain their control. I need time to think, Victoria said, hating how defeated she sounded. You have until tomorrow morning, Richard said, sliding the transfer documents across the table. Sign these, or watch everything you claim to care about burn. Victoria took the papers with numb fingers, her mind reeling. She thought she was strong enough to change, brave enough to choose love over power. But faced with the reality of what that choice would cost Jake and Emma, she felt her resolve crumbling. As she left the conference room, her phone rang. Jake's number flashed on the screen, and for a moment she considered not answering. How could she tell him that loving her had destroyed his life? How could she explain that her attempt to become a better person had made him and Emma targets? Hello. Her voice cracked on the single word. Victoria? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Something's happened. I know, she whispered. Jake, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. What are you talking about? Victoria, where are you? I can't. She stopped, realizing that her phone was probably being monitored, that every word was being recorded and analyzed. I can't see you anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. What? Jake's voice was small, confused. Victoria, what's going on? Yesterday, you said. Yesterday, I was living in a fantasy, Victoria said, each word feeling like a knife in her chest. But this is reality. I'm Victoria Corleone, and you're not part of my world. Don't do this, Jake said, and she could hear the pain in his voice. Don't let them win. Whatever they're threatening, whatever they've said, they haven't said anything, Victoria lied. I've just realized that this was a mistake. All of it. I'm not the woman you think I am, Jake. I'm exactly who I've always been, cold, calculating, and incapable of real love. The words tasted like poison, but she forced them out. Better to break his heart with lies and let him and Emma pay the price for her selfishness. I don't believe you, Jake said quietly. The woman who read to my daughter yesterday, who cried over strangers losing their jobs, that wasn't an act. That was real. It was a weakness, Victoria said, channeling every lesson her father had ever taught her about burying emotion. And I can't afford weakness. She hung up before he could respond, before her resolve could crumble completely. Then she turned off her phone and sat in her car in the parking garage, sobbing until she had no tears left. She'd found love, real love, for the first time in her life. And now she was going to have to destroy it to save the people she loved most. The dragon was back in her castle, surrounded by treasure that meant nothing, more alone than she'd ever been. And this time, there would be no knight coming to save her, because she'd just driven him away herself. Victoria's world is crashing down around her. Will she really sacrifice her happiness to protect Jake and Emma? Can love survive when everything seems hopeless? Let me know what you think she should do in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed. The next part will determine everything. Victoria sat in her penthouse that night, the transfer documents spread across her glass dining table like a death sentence. The city sparkled below her floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom she'd built through ruthless ambition and her father's cold teachings. But for the first time, the view felt like a prison. Her phone had been buzzing all evening with calls from Jake that she couldn't bring herself to answer. Each ring felt like another nail in the coffin of her heart, but she knew that staying away was the only way to keep him and Emma safe. At 11 p.m., her doorbell rang. Victoria's blood froze. No one could get past her building's security without clearance. She approached the door, cautiously, checking the security monitor, and her heart nearly stopped. Emma Skywalker stood in the hallway, her small face streaked with tears, clutching a stuffed dragon that looked well-loved and slightly worn. Emma. Victoria yanked open the door, dropping to her knees to meet the child's eyes. Sweetheart, what are you doing here? Where's your father? He's crying, Emma said simply, her voice small and broken. He won't tell me why, but I know it's because of you. Victoria's chest constricted. Emma, how did you get here? How did you get past security? Mr. Peterson from the front desk knows me. I told him I was your niece and that it was an emergency. Emma's chin lifted with a defiance that reminded Victoria painfully of Jake. I lied, but sometimes grown-ups lie too when they're scared. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Victoria glanced down the hallway, expecting to see Jake chasing after his daughter, but they were alone. Does your father know where you are? Emma shook her head. He fell asleep on the couch. He was holding his phone and crying, and I heard him say your name. So I took the bus here. You took the bus. Victoria's voice pitched higher with panic. Emma, that's incredibly dangerous. Not as dangerous as letting someone you love think you don't love them back, Emma said with the devastating wisdom that only children possess. Victoria stared at this 7-year-old girl who had somehow seen through all her lies and defenses to the truth beneath. Emma, you do love us, don't you? Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears. Because we love you. Daddy tries to hide it, but I can tell. He smiles differently when he talks about you, like when he looks at pictures of Mommy. The mention of Jake's deceased wife hit Victoria like a sledgehammer. She'd never asked about Emma's mother and had never wanted to intrude on that sacred grief. But now, hearing that Jake's feelings for her were being compared to what he'd felt for his wife, Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Your mommy died when I was 3, Emma said matter-of-factly. Cancer. Daddy says she's watching over us from heaven and that she wants us to be happy. I think she sent you to us. Victoria's vision blurred with tears. Oh, sweetheart. So why are you trying to leave? Emma's voice broke on the question. Did we do something wrong? Are you mad at us? No. Victoria pulled Emma into her arms, holding her tight against her chest. No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. You and your daddy are the most wonderful people I've ever met. Then why won't you see us anymore? Why did you make Daddy cry? Victoria closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of Emma's strawberry shampoo, memorizing the feeling of this precious child in her arms. How could she explain that loving them had put them in danger? How could she make a 7-year-old understand that sometimes love meant walking away? Sometimes, Victoria said carefully, grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. That's what Daddy said about Mommy, Emma said, pulling back to look at Victoria with eyes far too wise for her age. He said the doctors wanted to try more medicine, but Mommy chose to come home and spend her last days with us instead. He said she chose love over fighting. The parallel hit Victoria like lightning. Jake's wife had chosen to spend her final time loving her family rather than fighting a battle she couldn't win. But Victoria wasn't dying. She was just scared. But you're not sick, Emma continued, as if reading her thoughts. You're just scared. And Daddy says being scared is okay. But running away from people who love you isn't. Emma, I brought you something. Emma held up the stuffed dragon. Its purple scales faded from years of love. This is Sparkles. Daddy gave her me when Mommy died, and she helps when I'm scared or sad. Maybe she can help you too. Victoria took the dragon with trembling hands, feeling the weight of Emma's trust, her innocence, her absolute faith that love could conquer anything. The toy was warm from being clutched against Emma's chest, and Victoria could see the careful stitches where it had been repaired over the years. Evidence of a father's love, of a family that fixed things instead of throwing them away. Emma, I need to get you home to your father. He must be worried sick. He is, said a familiar voice from the doorway. Victoria's head snapped up to see Jake standing in the hallway, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry. He looked like he'd aged years in the few hours since their phone call. Jake. Emma Rose Skywalker, Jake said, his voice stern but gentle. You scared me half to death. You can't just disappear like that. I left a note, Emma said defensively. I said I was going to fix things. A note that said gone to help Victoria. Isn't exactly detailed instructions. Sunshine. Jake's eyes met Victoria's over Emma's head, and she saw a mixture of relief, pain, and something that looked like hope. When I woke up and found you gone. I'm sorry, Daddy. But Victoria was sad, and you were sad, and I thought maybe if we were all sad together, we could figure out how to be happy again. Jake stepped into the penthouse, and Victoria was struck by how out of place he looked in her sterile, expensive world. His work clothes and honest face seemed to highlight everything cold and artificial about her life. Emma, why don't you go look at the city lights from the big window? Victoria suggested gently. Your daddy and I need to talk. Emma nodded solemnly and skipped toward the living room, still clutching Sparkles. The moment she was out of earshot, Jake turned to Victoria with an expression that made her heart break all over again. She's right, you know, he said quietly. About you being scared. About running away. Jake, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. He stepped closer, and Victoria caught the familiar scent of motor oil and soap that had become home to her. Because the woman I kissed yesterday, the woman who cried over strangers losing their jobs, she wouldn't just walk away without a fight. Victoria wanted to tell him everything, about the board's threats, about Marcus's involvement, about the impossible choice she was facing. But she knew that knowledge would only put him in more danger. Some fights can't be won, she said instead. Says who? Your board. The same people who've been controlling your life since your father died. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Victoria, I may not have your education or your money, but I know something about fighting impossible battles. I fought cancer alongside my wife for 2 years. I fought the social services when they wanted to take Emma away after I lost my job. I fought my own despair when I wanted to give up after Sarah died. This is different. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting fear make your decisions. And that's not the woman I fell in love with. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. You don't know what they're capable of. Who? You're bored. Marcus Voldemort. Jake's eyes sharpened at Victoria's shocked expression. Yeah, I know about him. Did some digging after you called today. Turns out he's been buying up properties around the city, targeting businesses connected to your acquisitions. He's not just after revenge. Victoria, he's building something. Victoria's mind raced. If Jake had figured out Marcus's involvement, then others might too. The web of manipulation was more complex than she'd realized. He's working with my board, she admitted quietly. They're using him to control me, and he's using them to destroy everything I touch, including you. So we stopped them. The simple statement hung between them like a challenge. Victoria stared at Jake, seeing the determination in his eyes, the absolute certainty that together they could face anything. We, she whispered. We. Jake confirmed, stepping close enough to touch her face. Victoria, I've been alone for 4 years. I've raised my daughter by myself, fought my battles by myself, carried my grief by myself. But I don't want to be alone anymore. And neither do you. They'll destroy you, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. They'll hurt Emma. Then we make sure they can't. Jake's thumb brushed away her tears. But we do it together. No more running. No more lies. No more letting fear win. From the living room came Emma's voice. Daddy. Victoria. Come look. There's a shooting star. They turned to see Emma pressed against the window, pointing excitedly at the sky. Victoria had lived in this penthouse for 5 years and had never once looked up at the stars. Make a wish. Emma called. Daddy says shooting stars make wishes come true if you really, really believe. Victoria looked at Jake, seeing her own hope reflected in his eyes. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe believing was enough. Maybe love really could conquer fear if they were brave enough to fight for it. What do you wish for? Jake asked softly. Victoria smiled through her tears, feeling something shift inside her. The dragon's scales falling away to reveal the woman she was meant to be. I wish for the courage to fight for what matters, she said, and for the wisdom to know that what matters most is standing right in front of me. Jake's smile was like the sunrise after the longest night. Then let's go make that wish come true. As they walked toward Emma and the window full of stars, Victoria felt the turning point crystallize around them. She was done running, done letting others control her life, done choosing fear over love. Tomorrow, she would face her board, face Marcus, face whatever consequences came from choosing her heart over her empire. But tonight, she was going to hold the people she loved and remember what she was fighting for. The dragon had found her knight and her princess. Now it was time to save the kingdom. The turning point has arrived. Victoria has found her courage, but the real battle is just beginning. What do you think her plan should be to defeat both her board and Marcus? Share your strategies in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The climax is coming, and you won't want to miss it. The next morning, Victoria walked into the Corleone Tower boardroom with Jake by her side and a plan that would either save everything she loved or destroy her completely. She'd spent the night strategizing with Jake, his mechanical mind proving surprisingly adept at corporate warfare, while Emma slept peacefully on Victoria's couch, clutching sparkles and dreaming of dragons and happy endings. Gentlemen, Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. The unsigned transfer documents lay before her like a gauntlet thrown down. I believe you're expecting my signature. Richard Lannister's eyes narrowed as he noticed Jake standing behind Victoria's chair. Miss Corleone, this is a private board meeting. Your friend will need to wait outside. Actually, he won't. Victoria's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Mr. Skywalker is here as my witness. You see, I've decided not to sign your documents. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Robert Stark leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. Victoria, we discussed the consequences. You mean the threats? Victoria corrected. The intimidation. Blackmail. Yes, we discussed those. She opened her laptop and turned it toward the board. What we didn't discuss was this. The screen showed a video feed. Marcus Voldemort sitting in what appeared to be a warehouse, surrounded by boxes labeled with various company names. But it wasn't Marcus who made the board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was the man sitting across from him, Richard Lannister himself. You see, Victoria continued, her voice conversational. Jake here has a very interesting hobby. He builds things, cars, electronics, surveillance equipment. Last night, we decided to do a little investigating into Mr. Voldemort's operations. On the screen, Richard's voice came through clearly. The Skywalker problem needs to be handled permanently. Make it look like an accident. A gas leak, maybe. The girl, too. Can't leave loose ends. The blood drained from Richard's face. Around the table, the other board members stared in shock as their colleague's true nature was revealed. That's taken out of context, Richard stammered. Is it? Victoria clicked to another video file. Because we have 6 hours of footage showing you coordinating with Marcus to eliminate anyone who threatens your control of my company, including detailed plans to murder a 7-year-old child. Jake's hand tightened on Victoria's shoulder, and she drew strength from his presence. They'd known this confrontation would be dangerous, but they'd also known it was the only way to end the cycle of manipulation and fear. "You're all accessories," Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping the table. "Every one of you knew what Richard was planning. You may not have pulled the trigger, but you were willing to let an innocent man and his daughter die to maintain your power." "We didn't know," Robert began, but Victoria cut him off. "Didn't you? When Jake lost his job yesterday, when his lease was mysteriously terminated, when Emma was followed home from school, you all knew exactly what was happening. You just didn't care." The room erupted in chaos as board members began pointing fingers, denying involvement, trying to distance themselves from Richard's extremism. But Victoria wasn't finished. "The good news," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "is that you all have a choice. You can continue down this path, face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit murder, and watch your reputations burn. Or you can help me fix what we've broken." "What are you proposing?" asked Thomas Wayne, the oldest member of the board and the only one who'd remained silent during the revelations. Victoria stood, Jake moving to stand beside her, as an equal rather than a shadow. "Complete restructuring. We're going to become the company my father should have built, one that creates value instead of destroying it. We're going to rehire every Hartwell employee, rebuild every community we've damaged, and establish a foundation that puts people before profits." "That's financial suicide," Robert protested. "Is it? Or is it the smartest long-term investment we could make?" Victoria pulled up another presentation. "Jake and I spent the night running numbers. Companies with strong community ties, ethical practices, and employee loyalty consistently outperform those focused solely on short-term profits. We're not just doing the right thing. We're doing the smart thing." Richard laughed bitterly. "You think you can just wave a magic wand and erase decades of business practices? You think your little romance gives you the moral authority to destroy everything your father built?" "My father built an empire on fear," Victoria said quietly. "But empires built on fear always fall. I'm choosing to build something better, a legacy based on love, community, and the belief that business can be a force for good. And if we refuse—" Richard's voice was venomous. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in her life, it was a smile without calculation or coldness. "Then you'll be explaining to the FBI why you conspired to murder a single father and his 7-year-old daughter. The evidence has already been forwarded to Agent Sarah Connor at the federal building. She's very interested in your activities." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria could see the moment each board member realized they were trapped, that their only choice was between cooperation and prison. "There's one more thing," Jake said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. His voice was calm, but Victoria could hear the steel beneath it. "Marcus Voldemort is in federal custody as of this morning. Turns out, when you threaten to kill a child, law enforcement takes that very seriously." Richard's face went ashen. "You can't prove." "Actually, we can." Victoria clicked to a final video file. "Marcus was very talkative once he realized he was facing life in prison. He's provided detailed testimony about your entire operation, including financial records showing how you've been funneling company money to fund his activities." The video showed Marcus in an interrogation room, his earlier bravado replaced by the desperate cooperation of a man facing the rest of his life behind bars. He detailed every meeting with Richard, every plan to intimidate Victoria's allies, every threat made against innocent people. "It's over, Richard," Victoria said softly. "The question now is whether you want to spend your remaining years in prison or working to make amends for what you've done." Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Victoria saw the exact instant when his resistance crumbled. He was a bully and a manipulator, but he wasn't stupid. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his only chance at avoiding prison was cooperation. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your resignation, effective immediately, full cooperation with the restructuring, and a personal apology to every family you've helped destroy." Victoria's voice was firm but not cruel. "Do that, and I'll recommend leniency to the prosecutors." One by one, the board members nodded their agreement. Some looked relieved to be free of Richard's influence. Others simply resigned to their fate. But all of them understood that the old way of doing business was over. "There's one more person who deserves an apology," Victoria said, turning to Jake. "This man lost his job, his home, and nearly his life because of our actions. He deserves to hear you acknowledge that." Robert Stark, who had personally overseen Jake's termination, stood slowly. "Mr. Skywalker, I'm sorry. What we did was wrong. Inexcusable." Jake nodded curtly. "Apology accepted. But it's not me you really wronged. It's every worker, every family, every community that suffered while you prioritize profits over people. Then we'll make it right," Thomas Wayne said, speaking for the group. "All of it. Whatever it takes." Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for years without realizing it. The empire her father had built on fear and manipulation was finally crumbling, but from its ashes, something better was being born. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching for Jake's hand. "I'm stepping down as CEO." The announcement sent another shock wave through the room. Victoria had been the face of Corleone Enterprises for 5 years, the driving force behind its expansion and success. "I'll remain as chairman of the board," she continued, "but the company needs new leadership. Someone who understands that true success comes from building people up, not tearing them down." She turned to Thomas Wayne, the only board member who consistently advocated for ethical practices over the years. "Thomas, would you consider taking the position?" The older man's eyes widened. "Victoria, I'm honored, but you're the right choice. You have the experience, the integrity, and the vision to lead us into a better future." As the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, some to face criminal charges, others to begin the hard work of redemption, Victoria found herself alone with Jake in the conference room that had once been her throne room. "So," Jake said, pulling her into his arms, "how does it feel to burn down your empire?" Victoria laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Like the best decision I've ever made. Though I should probably mention, I'm unemployed now. Hope you don't mind dating a woman without a job." "Actually," Jake said, his eyes twinkling, "I might have a solution for that. Murphy's Auto Shop is looking for a new business manager. Someone who understands finance, but also cares about treating employees fairly. Know anyone who might be interested?" Victoria's heart swelled with love for this man who saw her not as a fallen CEO or a reformed villain, but simply as a woman worthy of a second chance. "I might know someone," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "But fair warning, she's still learning how to put people before profits. Good thing she has a great teacher," Jake murmured against her lips. As they kissed in the ruins of her old life, Victoria felt the final pieces of her transformation click into place. She was no longer the dragon hoarding treasure in a lonely castle. She was a woman who had chosen love over fear, community over control, and hope over despair. The empire was gone, but something infinitely more valuable had taken its place. A future built on love, a family that chose each other, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victory comes from having the courage to lose everything that doesn't matter. Outside the conference room windows, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun. No longer a kingdom to be conquered, but a community to be served. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Corleone was exactly where she belonged. Justice has been served and love has triumphed. But how will Victoria, Jake, and Emma build their new life together? Don't miss the beautiful conclusion coming next. Make sure you're subscribed and let me know in the comments what you think their future holds. 1 year later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the community center as Victoria knelt beside a small boy, helping him sound out the words in his picture book. The Hartwell Community Learning Center, built on the site where the old factory once stood, buzzed with activity on this sunny Saturday morning. The dragon learned that sharing her treasure made her happier than keeping it all to herself. Victoria read, her voice warm with the kind of joy she'd never known existed before that night in the alley. "Just like you did," piped up Emma, who was helping younger children with their reading at the next table. At 8 years old, she'd become the unofficial mascot of the center, her infectious enthusiasm drawing smiles from even the most reluctant learners. Victoria's heart swelled as she watched Emma work. The little girl had blossomed over the past year, secure in the love of her expanding family and proud of the role she'd played in bringing Victoria and Jake together. She still carried sparkles everywhere, but now the dragon had a friend, a small knight figurine that Victoria had given her, representing the courage to fight for what's right. "Mrs. Victoria," said Tommy Morrison, the same boy whose cookies Emma had shared that day at school, and whose father had been one of the Hartwell employees they'd rehired. "Will you read us another story?" "Of course, sweetheart," Victoria said, reaching for another book. The title made her smile. The Knight Who Saved the Dragon. As she began to read, Victoria caught sight of Jake through the center's large windows. He was in the parking lot, teaching a group of teenagers basic auto maintenance, a program they'd started to give kids practical skills while keeping them engaged in positive activities. His face was animated as he explained how an engine worked, his natural teaching ability shining through. The sight of him still made her heart skip, even after a year of marriage. Their wedding had been small and perfect, held right here in the community center, surrounded by the families they'd helped rebuild and the friends they'd made along the way. Emma had been the flower girl, of course, scattering rose petals with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. Victoria. Sarah Voldemort's voice drew her attention back to the present. The young widow had become one of Victoria's closest friends over the past year, their shared experience of loss and redemption creating an unbreakable bond. "How are the enrollment numbers looking?" Victoria asked, closing the storybook as the children dispersed to other activities. "Better than we hoped," Sarah said, her smile bright with pride. "We're at full capacity for the summer programs, and the waiting list for fall is already 50 families long. The scholarship fund you established is making all the difference." Victoria nodded, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing resources used to build rather than destroy. The Corleone Foundation, now run jointly by Victoria and Sarah, had become a model for corporate responsibility, funding education programs, small business loans, and community development projects across the city. "And Marcus?" Victoria asked quietly. Sarah's brother-in-law had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy, but Victoria had made sure he received counseling and job training during his incarceration. "He writes every week," Sarah said. "The anger is gone, Victoria. He's found peace. He wants to work with the foundation when he gets out, to help other people who've lost their way like he did." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Redemption was possible for everyone, even those who tried to destroy her. It was a lesson she'd learned from Jake, who taught her that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to build a better future. "Mrs. Skywalker," a teenage voice called from across the room. "Your husband is asking for you in the garage." Victoria's heart fluttered at the title she still wasn't used to. Mrs. Skywalker. Victoria Skywalker. She'd legally changed her name 6 months ago, wanting to leave the Corleone legacy behind and embrace the family she'd chosen. She found Jake in the center's automotive bay, his hands covered in grease, as he worked with a group of high school students on an old car they were restoring together. The sight of him in his element, teaching, nurturing, building something beautiful from broken parts, never failed to take her breath away. "You called for me, Mr. Skywalker," she said, using the formal tone that always made him grin. "I did indeed, Mrs. Skywalker," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag before pulling her into his arms, not caring that he was getting grease on her clothes. "I have something to show you." He led her to the car the students had been working on, a 1967 Mustang that had been little more than rust and dreams when they'd started. Now it gleamed like new, its engine purring with the satisfaction of expert restoration. "It's beautiful," Victoria breathed, running her hand along the smooth paint. "The kids must be so proud." "They are," Jake agreed. "But that's not what I wanted to show you." He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This is..." Victoria's hands trembled as she unwrapped the gift, revealing a small wooden dragon, hand-carved and painted in brilliant purples and golds. But this dragon wasn't hoarding treasure or breathing fire. Instead, it was dancing with a small knight, both figures carved with exquisite detail and obvious love. "Jake," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect. Emma helped design it," he said softly. "She said the dragon and the knight should be dancing because that's what love looks like. Two people choosing to move together through life." Victoria looked up at her husband, this man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. "I love our life, our family, everything we've built together." even though you went from running a billion-dollar empire to managing a community center? Jake teased gently. Victoria laughed, thinking of the penthouse she'd sold, the corporate lifestyle she'd abandoned, the cold isolation she'd traded for this warm, chaotic, beautiful life. Especially because of that, she said firmly. I thought success meant having power over others. But real success is using whatever power you have to lift others up. Speaking of which, Jake said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, Emma has something she wants to ask you. As if summoned by her name, Emma appeared in the doorway of the garage, practically vibrating with excitement. Victoria, Daddy, guess what? She bounced on her toes, unable to contain her news. Mrs. Patterson says our class is going to write letters to the mayor about making more community centers like ours, and she wants me to be the one to read our letter at the city council meeting because I'm the best speaker. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Victoria said, kneeling to Emma's level. You're going to do amazing. Will you help me practice? Emma asked. I want to tell them about how you and Daddy prove that love can fix anything, even really broken things. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. I'd be honored to help you. As the three of them walked back toward the main building, Victoria caught sight of their reflection in the center's windows, a family that had been forged not by blood or circumstance, but by choice, courage, and the radical decision to believe in second chances. The community center was bustling with activity as the day wound down. Families were gathering their children, teenagers were cleaning up their project areas, and volunteers were preparing for the evening programs. It was controlled chaos. But was there chaos? A beautiful mess of humanity that Victoria had learned to love more than any sterile boardroom or silent penthouse. Victoria, called out Mrs. Chun, the librarian who'd become like a grandmother to Emma. Don't forget, book club is Tuesday night. We're discussing that new novel about corporate redemption. Wouldn't miss it, Victoria called back, smiling at the irony. A year ago, she would have scoffed at the idea of joining a book club. Now, it was one of the highlights of her week. As they reached the parking lot, Jake caught Victoria's hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Any regrets? He asked softly, a question he'd asked her every few months during their first year together, as if he couldn't quite believe she'd chosen this life over her old one. Victoria looked around at the community they'd helped build, at the families they'd brought together, at the little girl who'd taught them both that love was the greatest treasure of all. She thought about the woman she'd been, cold, isolated, powerful but empty. Then she looked at the woman she'd become, connected, purposeful, rich in all the ways that truly mattered. Only one, she said, squeezing Jake's hand. His face fell slightly. What's that? Victoria's smile was radiant as she pulled him closer. I regret that it took me so long to find you. Jake's answering smile could have powered the entire city. Well, when you put it that way. Daddy. Victoria. Emma called from where she was already buckled into their modest sedan. A far cry from Victoria's old Bentley, but infinitely more precious because it carried the people she loved. Can we stop for ice cream on the way home? I want to celebrate our perfect day. Every day is perfect when we're together, Victoria said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they drove through the neighborhoods they'd helped rebuild, past the small businesses they'd funded, through the communities they'd brought back to life, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd started as a dragon hoarding treasure in a lonely castle, convinced that power and wealth were the only things that mattered. But love had transformed her into something better, not a dragon or a knight, but simply a woman who'd learned that the greatest treasure wasn't gold or power or control. It was the laughter of a child who called you family, the touch of a partner who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself, and the knowledge that you'd use your life to make the world a little bit brighter. The fairy tale was complete, but unlike the stories in books, this one didn't end with happily ever after. It ended with happily ever after, and the adventure continues. Because the best love stories aren't about reaching a destination, they're about choosing, every single day, to keep walking the path together, hand in hand, heart to heart, building something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. And as the sun set over the city they'd helped heal, Victoria Skywalker knew that her greatest adventure was just beginning. And there you have it, beautiful souls, a story of redemption, love, and the courage to change. Victoria found her happily ever after not by conquering the world, but by learning to serve it. What did you think of this journey? Which moment touched your heart the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to transform everything it touches.